The wagon had been limping along for days, its wheels groaning like an old man's bones. Abigail had tried not to complain, even when her feet swelled in her worn leather boots, even when the dust filled her lungs until every breath came with a cough. She had been a good wife, or at least she'd tried to be, though the word wife still felt strange on her tongue. 3 weeks ago, she had been Abigail Moore of Philadelphia, a seamstress with calloused fingers and a heart full of daydreams. She had answered an advertisement mail-order bride wanted for rancher in Texas. Must be of strong constitution. No family ties preferred. It had sounded like an adventure, a chance to start fresh. But the man who had met her off the train in Kansas was not the kind-eyed gentleman who had written her letters. He was taller, thinner, and meaner looking, with a mouth that never seemed to smile except when he was talking about money. His name was Charles Briggs, though she learned quickly that he preferred to be called Mr. Briggs. The first few days, she told herself it was only the strain of the journey making him short-tempered. But when he slapped her hand away from the bread sack because she ate too much, she began to understand. 2 days ago, the right wheel had cracked clean through, leaving the wagon at a tilt. Charles swore, kicked the wheel, then kicked the mule. Abigail had tried to help, fetching water from the riverbed they'd camped near, but the mule spooked and she stumbled, spilling half the bucket. That was when he decided she was more trouble than she was worth. "I'll fetch another wife soon enough," he'd muttered. Then, more loudly, "You'll never make it to Texas. Better you stay here." He dumped her bundle onto the ground, a torn shawl, a single crust of bread wrapped in paper, and her Bible, and climbed onto the mule. "You won't last the night," he called over his shoulder, his voice carrying across the dry air like a sentence passed down by a judge. Abigail had stood there, frozen, watching him grow smaller in the distance. Until the shimmer of heat swallowed him whole. By midday, the sun was a hammer against her skull. There was no shade but for the thin shadow of a dead mesquite tree, its branches like skeletal fingers scratching at the sky. She sat beneath it, trying to conserve her strength, but the heat still sucked the moisture from her body. Her lips cracked, and each swallow felt like dragging sandpaper down her throat. The dry riverbed beside her mocked her with its emptiness, just cracked mud and a scattering of stones, where water had once run. The air shimmered in the distance, promising mirages she didn't have the energy to chase. By evening, the coyotes began to sing. At first, their cries were far away, lonely and eerie, but as the shadows lengthened, the howls crept closer. Abigail clutched the shawl tighter around her, though it did little to keep out the chill that came after sunset. She thought of her mother's voice, soft, steady, always humming when she sewed. She thought of the church bells back home, their sound carrying down the narrow streets on Sunday mornings. She thought of the little bed she had slept in for 23 years, and how she had left it behind with such eagerness. Now she wished for nothing more than that bed. The stars came out one by one, cold and unblinking, and the darkness settled thick around her. The howls were close now, too close. Something moved in the brush beyond the riverbed, its footfalls deliberate and heavy. Abigail's hands trembled as she held the crust of bread, debating whether to eat it now or save it for morning, if morning ever came for her. She bowed her head and whispered a prayer, her voice thin and breaking in the still air. "Lord, send someone, anyone." The night answered only with the steady drum of her heartbeat and the rustle of something moving just beyond the reach of starlight. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote yipped and another answered. Abigail's eyes stung not from dust, but from the tears she refused to let fall. She was alone, abandoned in the vast emptiness of the West. And in that moment, she began to wonder if Charles Briggs had been right, if she truly wouldn't last the night. The sound came first soft, but steady, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. hooves striking the dry ground in a measured rhythm. Abigail's head lifted, though her neck felt as heavy as stone. Through the wavering heat haze, a figure emerged. At first, she thought the desert was playing tricks on her again. But no mirage. Moved with such purpose, a lone rider approached, his horse a deep chestnut, its mane rippling like liquid fire in the fading light. The man in the saddle sat tall and straight, a silhouette cut sharp against the dying sun. His hair was black as midnight, braided in 2 long cords that brushed his chest. A necklace of bone and turquoise hung against the tanned skin of his chest. He slowed his horse as he neared, studying her without a word. His eyes, dark and unblinking, took in everything: the cracked lips, the way she clutched the shawl, the bread she hadn't eaten. Abigail's pulse hammered in her ears. She had heard stories about the Comanche wild, fierce, untamed riders who could shoot an arrow at full gallop and strike a bird from the sky. She didn't know if the stories were true, but she knew this man was dangerous in a way Charles Briggs had never been. For a long, quiet moment, they simply stared at one another. Then he spoke, his voice low and even. "You're coming home with me." Before she could answer, he swung down from the saddle in one smooth motion. The ground seemed to shift under him, like the land itself welcomed his steps. He reached for her, and though every part of her wanted to flinch, she found herself leaning toward him instead. His hands were warm and strong, calloused from work and weather. With effortless strength, he lifted her as though she weighed no more than a child and set her before him on the horse. He swung up behind her, his arm a steady wall against her back, keeping her from falling. The smell of leather, horse, and faint wood smoke surrounded her. And for the first time since Charles had left her, she felt something close to safety. They rode in silence at first, the only sounds the steady clop of hooves and the whisper of wind through dry grass. The world shifted around them, endless. Plains rolling into shadow, the first stars winking above. Finally, she spoke, her voice hoarse. "Why are you helping me?" He didn't answer right away. "Because you were alone," he said at last, "and because I was too." They rode for what felt like hours until the land began to change. Low hills rose from the plains, dotted with scrub oak and mesquite. A narrow creek ran at their base, its trickle of water like music to Abigail's ears. At the edge of the hills, a small camp came into view. 2 ponies grazed nearby, and smoke curled from a low fire. There was only one shelter, a simple structure of poles and hides, and it looked as though it had been built for one man. He helped her down, steadying her when her knees buckled. Then, without ceremony, he handed her a waterskin. She drank deeply, the cool water spilling down her chin, and when she stopped, he took it back without a word. "I am Tovey," he said finally. "Abigail," she replied, and for some reason her voice trembled. That night he gave her the shelter and took the ground beside the fire for himself. She lay awake listening to the strange night sounds, the croak of frogs in the creek, the rustle of wind in the grass, and the slow, steady breathing of the man who had found her. Days passed. Tovey said little, but his silence was not cold. He taught her where to find wild onions, how to strip bark from a mesquite branch for kindling, and which berries would poison her if she ate them. She learned the way his eyes softened when he watched the horses, the way his mouth almost curved into a smile when she tried to speak his language and failed. One evening, as the sun bled red across the sky, she asked him the question that had been pressing on her since the night they met. "Why were you alone out here?" He was quiet for a long while. "The people I loved are gone," he said finally. "I thought I would spend the rest of my life with no one." His eyes met hers. Then, and the air between them shifted. "But the earth sends what it wills." Abigail's throat tightened. She thought of Charles Briggs, of the hot, empty days on the trail, of the way she had been left behind like a burden too heavy to carry. She thought of the moment she'd seen Tovi riding toward her, and how something deep inside her had whispered, "You're safe now." The nights grew cooler. She began to feel stronger, her cheeks filling out, the sun no longer burning her so easily. Tovi had begun to smile small, rare things like the first blossoms after winter. One night, sitting by the fire, he reached for her hand. "Abigail," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. "If you wish to go to your people, I will take you." She looked into the fire, then into his face. "I don't think I have people anymore," she said softly. "Not except here." For the first time, he smiled fully, and in that moment, she knew she was no longer a woman left to die in the desert. She was a woman who had been found. And maybe, just maybe, she had been meant to be left behind, so that the one man who would truly see her could ride into her life.